The entire city admired him, respected him, and even feared him. From the ashes of betrayal and loss, he had built an empire. Now, he had everything: wealth, power, influence. The same people who once ignored him now sought his attention. Yet, despite all he had gained, something inside him felt empty. Every morning, he woke up in a luxurious penthouse, surrounded by riches beyond his wildest dreams. His days were filled with expensive suits, high-profile meetings, and grand events. But at night, when he was alone with his thoughts, a haunting question echoed in his mind: was this all there was? Success had come at a cost. Along the way, he had lost people. Some had betrayed him, others simply no longer belonged in his world. He had spent years proving himself, fighting for respect, but now that he had it, he wasn't sure what to do with it. The old woman's lessons still lingered in his mind, yet their true meaning remained elusive. The weight of his responsibilities was heavier than he had imagined. Every decision he made affected countless lives: employees, business partners, even strangers who depended on his investments. And yet, despite everything he had accomplished, there was still an emptiness inside him, a lingering feeling that something was missing. He often gazed down at the city below, remembering the boy he used to be, the one who struggled to afford a meal, the one who cried at his wedding, the one who felt trapped. That boy was gone, replaced by a man of power. But was he truly free? Something deep within told him his journey wasn't over, that there was still something greater than money or power waiting to be discovered. He just didn't know what it was yet. That morning started like any other: meetings, calls, and decisions that shaped industries. But then, a letter arrived, and it changed everything. It was delivered by hand. The envelope was old, slightly worn, with no return address. He hesitated before opening it. In his world, unexpected messages often carried danger. But something about this letter felt different. As he unfolded the paper and scanned the words, his heart began to race. The message was brief yet powerful. There are things about her you do not know. Secrets she never shared. If you wish to understand why she chose you, come to the place where it all began. There was no signature, only an unfamiliar address. A flood of emotions surged through him. The old woman, the one who had unexpectedly entered his life, changed his fate, and left him with a fortune and a purpose he was still trying to comprehend, was still shaping his destiny, even in death. Who had sent this letter? And what secrets remained hidden? His mind raced with possibilities. Had she kept something from him all these years? Were there more truths about her past waiting to be uncovered? Curiosity pulled him in. He couldn't ignore this. He had spent his life chasing power, fighting enemies, and proving himself. But this was different. This wasn't about money or influence. This was about understanding the woman who had transformed his life. And so, despite the risks, he decided to follow the trail. He had to know the truth, whatever it might be. The address from the letter led him to a forgotten part of the city, an old, nearly abandoned estate hidden behind towering trees. The building looked ancient, its walls weathered by time, yet something about it felt strangely familiar. As he stepped inside, the air was thick with memories, as if the past itself lingered within these walls. He found old photographs, documents, and handwritten letters, fragments of a life he had never known existed. And as he read through them, a shocking truth unraveled before him. The old woman had never been just a lonely widow. She had once been a force in the world, a powerful businesswoman, a strategist, someone who had built and shaped industries long before he ever knew her. But that wasn't the most surprising part. She had been watching him long before they met. One letter, written years ago, mentioned his name. She had known about his struggles, his pain, his potential. She had deliberately chosen him, not out of desperation, but out of purpose. He does not yet see what he is capable of. But I do. The words sent shivers down his spine. She had orchestrated everything, carefully setting events into motion so that he would be forced to rise above his circumstances. She hadn't just married him, she had tested him, guided him, and, in her own unconventional way, prepared him for the life he now lived. But why? As he dug deeper, another truth emerged. The old woman had powerful enemies. She had spent her life fighting corruption, exposing criminals, and reshaping industries. And now, those same forces were still watching, waiting, perhaps even plotting against him. Her legacy wasn't just wealth, it was a battle she had left unfinished. Whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. The realization hit hard. Everything he had endured, his struggles, his rise, his betrayals, had been leading to this moment. She had chosen him because she knew he was the only one who could continue what she had started. Now, he had a choice: walk away and live in ignorance, or embrace the truth and step into a fight that was far from over. For the first time in years, a fire reignited within him. Days after uncovering the old woman's past, he sensed a shift in the air. The silence that had followed his success was an illusion. He had thought his battles were over, that he had conquered every challenge thrown his way. He was wrong. A legal notice arrived, questioning his ownership of the empire he had built. A news report surfaced, painting him as a fraud who had manipulated an old woman for her wealth. Then came the threats, subtle at first, then more direct. Someone was trying to dismantle everything he had fought for. At first, he assumed it was old enemies seeking revenge. But as he investigated, he realized this was something far bigger. The forces moving against him weren't just bitter rivals or estranged family members. These were people in power, leaders, politicians, unseen figures who had controlled the system for years. They had feared the old woman, and now they feared him even more. By inheriting her legacy, he had unknowingly inherited her enemies. This wasn't just about protecting his wealth anymore. It was about survival. One by one, the attacks escalated. His businesses faced audits and legal scrutiny. Investors pulled out without warning. People he trusted turned their backs on him, some out of fear, others likely bribed or threatened. For the first time in years, he felt truly vulnerable. But running wasn't an option. He had come too far, lost too much, and learned too many lessons to back down now. If they thought they could silence him the way they had tried to silence her, they were wrong. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. As he sat in silence, the city lights flickering outside his window, he pieced together the chaos unfolding around him. The threats. The legal battles. The unseen enemies. It was all too calculated, too personal. Someone out there knew exactly how to dismantle him. Then came the knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. His instincts screamed caution. Slowly, he approached and unlocked it, only to come face to face with someone he never thought he'd see again. For a moment, time froze. The person standing before him was a ghost from his past, someone he had lost, left behind, or been betrayed by. Their presence here now made no sense. "You need to listen," they said, stepping inside before he could refuse. "You're in danger." His eyes narrowed. "I already know that." "Not like this." Their voice was urgent, almost desperate. "You don't know who you're up against." Memories rushed back, the trust they once shared, the pain that followed when they disappeared from his life. Whether it was betrayal or circumstance, he had believed they were gone forever. And yet, here they were, acting as if they still cared. He struggled to process the sudden shift. Was this the truth, or was it another deception? Another game played by the people trying to destroy him? "Why should I trust you?" he finally asked. Their expression darkened, something between guilt and urgency flashing in their eyes. "Because if you don't," they said, voice low and steady, "you might not live long enough to regret it." The weight of those words settled between them. Old wounds reopened, past betrayals resurfaced. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. And now, someone from his past was part of the fight. Whether they were an ally or another threat, he had yet to find out. The offer came in the dead of night. The man who delivered it exuded influence and danger. He wasn't just another businessman or politician, he was someone who operated in the shadows, someone who pulled the strings of the world's most powerful people. You've come far, the man said, voice calm but commanding. But the forces against you won't stop. They never do, unless, of course, you decide to stop fighting them and start working with them. A document was placed before him, an agreement that promised everything he could ever desire. Wealth beyond measure. Control over industries. Protection from his enemies. But the cost was steep. He would have to surrender everything the old woman had built. The companies she had founded. The legacy she had left behind. It would all become part of a larger machine, one controlled by people who thrived on power and secrecy. In return, he would be untouchable. The war against him would end. His enemies would become his allies. The threats, the betrayals, the battles, everything would disappear. He would no longer be fighting against the system. He would become part of it. It was the most tempting offer he had ever received. But as he stared at the contract, he felt the ghost of the old woman watching him. Her voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of everything she had taught him. Power means nothing if it comes at the cost of your soul. He thought of everything he had endured, the struggles, the betrayals, the sacrifices. He hadn't come this far just to become another puppet. But rejecting the offer meant war. He would be fighting an enemy far greater than before. He would lose allies, resources, possibly even his life. The man across from him smirked, as if he already knew what choice he would make. "This is your only chance," he said. "Say yes, and you'll never have to fight again. Say no, and you may not live long enough to regret it." His hands clenched into fists. This was more than just a decision about power. This was a test. A test of everything he had become. Did he take the easy road and gain control at the cost of his principles? Or did he stand his ground, even if it meant losing everything? The choice he made would define the rest of his life. And he only had one chance to get it right. This wasn't just an attack on his fortune, it was an attempt to erase him completely. For the first time in a long while, he wondered if he could survive this. But deep inside, he knew one thing: they could take his money, his reputation, even the empire he had built, but they would never take his will to fight. Everything had led to this moment: the betrayals, the battles, the sacrifices. Now, it was all or nothing. His enemies had taken almost everything from him. His empire lay in ruins, his reputation was shattered, and those he once trusted had either turned against him or disappeared. But one thing remained: his determination. Standing amidst the wreckage of what was once his world, he thought of the old woman and the lessons she had left behind. She had warned him that true power wasn't about wealth or influence, it was about resilience. It was about standing tall when everything else collapsed. And now, he had to prove he understood. His enemies believed they had won. They thought he would break, run, or fade into nothing. But they had underestimated him. He was no longer the desperate boy who had once wept at his own wedding. He was a different man now, one forged by fire, betrayal, and pain. As he gathered the last of his allies, those who still believed in him, he knew this fight wasn't just for himself. It was for everyone who had ever been crushed by the system, for those who had been used, discarded, and silenced. This was bigger than business. This was about justice. The first strike came swiftly, a legal case designed to put him behind bars. They wanted him erased completely. But they had underestimated his ability to plan ahead. Documents were already in place, proving his innocence and exposing the corruption behind the charges. Then came the financial attack. His assets were frozen, his property seized. But he had anticipated this too. Hidden investments, backup funds, and allies in unexpected places ensured he still had the resources to fight back. But the real battle wasn't in the courts or the banks, it was in the shadows, where deals were made and lives were destroyed. His enemies had operated from behind the curtain for too long. It was time to pull that curtain down. One by one, he exposed their crimes, their illegal dealings, their hidden transactions, the lives they had ruined. It all came to light. He used the same ruthless tactics they had used against him, but with one difference: he fought with truth, not lies. The public, once manipulated by false headlines, began to see the truth. The powerful men who had controlled everything from the shadows suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Their empire, built on deception, started to crack. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he thought he would lose, when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But then he would remember the old woman's words, her unwavering belief in him, and he would push forward. In the end, the battle wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about proving that no matter how strong the enemy, no matter how impossible the odds, a single person with enough courage and determination could change everything. And he had. As the dust settled, he stood among the ruins of what had once been his greatest challenge. He had lost much, but he had gained something far greater, his freedom, his purpose, and a legacy that no one could ever take away from him again. The enemies who had tried to break him now stood before him, powerless, exposed, awaiting their fate. For so long, they had controlled the game, pulling the strings from the shadows. But now, the roles were reversed. They were at his mercy. He had won. But was victory enough? As he stared at the men who had ruined lives, stolen from the innocent, and betrayed even their own allies, rage burned within him. At one point, they had taken everything from him, his peace, his stability, his empire. They had humiliated him, left him with nothing, and expected him to vanish. Yet, here he stood. The same people who once whispered behind his back now watched in silence, waiting to see what he would do. His closest allies stood by, ready to follow his command. Justice was in his hands. But was it justice he wanted, or revenge? The old woman's words echoed in his mind, power is knowing you can destroy someone but choosing not to. For so long, he had fought to survive. Every move he made had been about proving himself, about reclaiming what was taken from him. And now, with his enemies defeated, he realized he was at the most dangerous crossroads of his life. Destroying them would be easy. He could expose every last secret, ensure they spent the rest of their lives in disgrace or behind bars. He could use his power to make them suffer the way he had. But would that make him any different from them? For a moment, he thought back to the boy he once was, the poor, helpless soul who had cried at his own wedding, believing his life was over. That boy would have chosen revenge. That boy would have burned everything to the ground. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He had gained more than just wealth and power, he had gained wisdom. And wisdom told him that revenge was a cycle, one that never truly ended. If he destroyed them now, someone else would rise in their place, fueled by the same hatred, the same thirst for vengeance. He took a deep breath. "I won't become you," he finally said, his voice steady. His enemies flinched, knowing he spoke the truth. "You spent your lives destroying others, believing power made you untouchable. But look at you now." He let the words sink in. "I could end you all right here. No one would stop me. No one would blame me." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. "But I won't." Murmurs spread through the room. His allies exchanged glances, some shocked, others relieved. "I won't waste another second of my life on you," he continued. "You're finished. And I won't let you drag me down with you." With that, he turned his back on them. It wasn't an act of weakness. It was the greatest show of strength. True power wasn't about destroying enemies. It was about rising above them. And in that moment, he knew this was his true victory. The dust had settled. The battles were over. The war for survival, revenge, and redemption had come to an end. Now, standing atop the empire he had rebuilt, he finally saw everything clearly. Power and wealth had never been the true destination. They were merely tools. He had spent so much of his life chasing them, believing they would bring him security, respect, and peace. But in the end, none of those things had ever been about money or influence, they had been about purpose. For years, he had been defined by the struggles of his past, by the helpless boy who once cried at his own wedding, by the betrayed man who lost everything, and by the fighter who had clawed his way back to the top. Each version of himself had played a role in shaping the man he had become. But now, for the first time, he was more than just a survivor, he was a leader. The old woman had seen something in him long before he had seen it in himself. She had chosen him not because of his desperation, but because of his potential. She knew his journey wasn't about escaping poverty, it was about breaking cycles, rewriting destinies, and creating something bigger than himself. And now, he had a choice. He could rule his empire with the same ruthless ambition as those who had once tried to destroy him. He could ensure that no one ever dared challenge him again. Or, he could use his power to build something greater. And he knew what he had to do. Power isn't just about the ability to destroy, it's about choosing not to. For so long, he had fought to survive, every move driven by the need to prove himself and reclaim what had been taken from him. But now, with his enemies defeated, he found himself at the most dangerous crossroads of his life. Destroying them would be easy. He could expose their darkest secrets, ensuring they spent the rest of their lives in disgrace or behind bars. He could make them suffer the way they had made him suffer. But would that make him any different from them? For a moment, he thought back to the boy he once was, the helpless soul who had cried at his own wedding, believing his life was over. That boy would have chosen revenge. That boy would have burned everything to the ground. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He had gained more than just wealth and power, he had gained wisdom. And wisdom had taught him that revenge was a cycle, one that never truly ended. If he destroyed them now, someone else would rise to take their place, driven by the same hatred, the same thirst for vengeance. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. "I won't become you." His voice was steady. His enemies flinched, knowing he spoke the truth. You spent your lives destroying others, believing power made you untouchable. But look at you now. He let his words sink in. I could end you all right here. No one would stop me. No one would blame me. He paused. But I won't. A murmur spread through the room. His allies exchanged glances, some shocked, others relieved. I won't waste another second of my life on you, he continued. You're finished. And I won't let you drag me down with you. Then, he turned his back on them. It wasn't an act of weakness, it was the greatest display of strength. True power wasn't about destroying enemies, it was about rising above them. And in that moment, he knew this was his true victory. The dust had settled. The battles were over. The war for survival, revenge, and redemption had finally come to an end. Now, standing atop the empire he had rebuilt, he saw everything clearly. Power and wealth had never been the true destination, they had only ever been tools. For years, he had chased them, believing they would bring him security, respect, and peace. But in the end, none of those things had ever been about money or influence. They had always been about purpose. For so long, he had been defined by his struggles, by the helpless boy who had once cried at his own wedding, by the betrayed man who had lost everything, and by the fighter who had clawed his way back to the top. Each version of himself had shaped the man he had become. But now, for the first time, he was more than just a survivor. He was a leader. The old woman had seen something in him long before he had seen it in himself. She had chosen him not because of his desperation, but because of his potential. She had known his journey wasn't about escaping poverty, it was about breaking cycles, rewriting destinies, and creating something bigger than himself. And now, he had a choice. He could rule his empire with the same ruthless ambition as those who had once tried to destroy him, ensuring that no one ever dared challenge him again. Or, he could use his power to build something greater. He knew what he had to do. His final act wasn't about expanding his fortune or eliminating his enemies. It was about securing a future that no longer relied on greed, manipulation, or revenge. He restructured his businesses, ensuring they would benefit the people who worked for them, not just those at the top. He invested in education, creating opportunities for those who, like him, had once been powerless. He built shelters, hospitals, and schools, not to gain favor, but because he finally understood. True power is in lifting others up.